Welcome to those of you who have joined over the phone. We're going to get started in a few minutes. Welcome to those of you over the phone. We're going to get started at 11:35.
Hello, everyone. Today is Friday, January 15th. So it is Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. So thank you so much for joining us. We are glad that you were able to find your way to this event. either online or over the phone. I'm Grisel Rodriguez Morales. I am manager of the Rush Generations programs. I know that many of you, especially our Rush Generations members, are used to seeing Jasmine. She's one of our wonderful program coordinators. She's with us today. You'll see her at the end of the program. By the way, I'd like to thank her for helping us plan this event. Jasmine and I are members of the Department of Social Work and Community Health at Rush University Medical Center. And today we are excited to present to you, in collaboration with the Office of Community Health Equity and Engagement, this event, honoring the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., racism as a public health issue. I also would like to thank other key colleagues that help with the planning of this event, such as Kimberly Johnson, Patrick Stanley, as well as Karen, who is going to be helping us with closed captioning, and Teve helping us with some of the technology. Some of the housekeeping items that I like to point out, please make sure that you type any questions, reactions, responses, comments in the live chat box on our YouTube channel throughout the program. And we will share this with the panelists at the end. The live chat button is usually located at the bottom or right side of your screen. It depends on the device you're using. But please type any questions, responses, and comments that you have throughout the event. We wanted to also start by recognizing the Rush Choir, which has been performing at Rush's MLK Celebrations for over 2 decades. You saw the choir, if you're in our YouTube channel, you saw the choir in the slideshow leading to this event. I don't know about you, but the slideshow made me feel like singing. This year, of course, it wasn't possible to have them be with us today, but we wanted to recognize them since we continue to be united in spirit. I'm gonna read their names. As sopranos, we have Janice Jones, Kimberly Martin, which is the choir vice president, Margie Ramsey, Yin Jen He. Altos, we have Cassandra Taylor, Georgetta Davis, Ida Bird, Mandisa Uptown, choir secretary, Renee Bates. And tenors, we have Anthony Mixon, Nick Mixon, Charlene Rush, Dr. Yi Soo Kim, Emma Dixon, which is the choir president, Ricky Ross, Ronald Terrell, Tommy Roberts, and our wonderful pianist, Michael Stokes. Thank you so much for always bringing joy during all these events. We look forward to next year when we hope to celebrate this event in person. Now I'd like to invite the Reverend Clayton L. Thomason to offer the convocation. Reverend Thomason holds the Bishop Anderson Endowed Chair of Religion and Ethics in Medicine, and is also the chair of the Department of Religion, Health, and Human Values, and director of the program in Healthcare Ethics at Rush University Medical Center. The department provides spiritual care and ethics consultation services to the medical center. They host one of the nation's leading programs in clinical pastoral education, an internationally recognized research program in spirituality and health, as well as education programs in healthcare ethics. He serves on the board of the Chicago End of Life Care Coalition and the Pulse Illinois Leadership Task Force. He's a trustee of the Berkeley Divinity School at Yale University and of St. Augustine College in Chicago, and was selected in 2011 as fellow of the Fellow Institute of Medicine of Chicago. Thank you so much, Reverend Thomason.
Thank you, Grisel.
Thank you.
I believe that Dr. King would want you to know today that you are loved. Yes, you and you and you and you, no matter who you are, no matter how many times you've won, no matter how many times you've lost, no matter who you voted for, no matter who you did not vote for. You are loved. That means you can transmit love too. It was in the year 1957, Christmas Day, December 25th, that Martin Luther King Jr. preached a sermon titled Loving Your Enemies at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. It included a passage whose first lines we remember often, but whose last lines we don't remember so much. It goes like this: darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Hate multiplies hate. Violence multiplies violence, and toughness multiplies toughness in a descending spiral of destruction. Did you catch that? Light drives out darkness, love drives out hate. Otherwise, we descend in a spiral of destruction. This day, this season, this year, 2021, is a season to amplify light in the darkness, to spread good news, to spread love. Yes, you and you. You are loved. And with that love comes light, inevitable light. People who are loved shine out light, and people who love give forth light. People who love are repeating the same creative act of God. Let there be light. Let there be love. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Thomason. We greatly appreciate you joining us today and for offering that wonderful invocation. Now let's move on to our panel presentation, which will be moderated by Darlene Oliver Hightower. She is the Vice President of Community Health Equity here at Rush University Medical Center. She is responsible for a team of 50 staff who oversee the implementation and evaluation of community programs aimed at improving the health of individuals in Rush's community areas. She oversees the Office of Community Health Equity and Engagement, which includes 3 school-based health clinics and the Adolescent Family Center, Community Benefit Reporting, the Rush's Cradle to Career Healthcare Pipeline Programs, and AFFIRM, the Center for Gender, Sexuality, and Reproductive Health. Darlene is a member of the senior leadership team for Westside United, a cross-sector collective impact collaborative aimed at improving health and economic vitality on Chicago's West Side, and co-chair of the Racial Justice Action Committee, which is a system-wide initiative aimed at advancing social and racial justice at Rush. Prior to joining Rush, Darlene was National Vice President of Programs for Public Allies, Inc. Darlene has served as Chicago Community Trust Leadership Fellow, University of Chicago Civic Leadership Academy Fellow, and an administrative law judge for the Chicago Department of Human Relations. Additionally, she was named a Culture of Health Leader Fellow with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. She attended the Bradley University, graduating with high honors, and received her law degree from Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C. We have a great asset among us, and we greatly appreciate you moderating the panel, Darlene. So take it away.
Thanks so much, Grizel, and good morning to everyone on the panel, everybody that's listening in today. So happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward to having a great conversation with our panel. Before I introduce them, I wanted to say a few words, just kind of frame how I'm envisioning or seeing this MLK Day. So between May and September of 2020, I watched protesters with masks, Black Lives Matter signs, and waving fists marched through my neighborhood and across the city of Chicago. We had reached a boiling point in this country after the death of George Floyd on May 25th. I remember getting an email from one of my staff members asking what Rush planned to do in light of Floyd's murder. Would we issue a statement? Could staff join protests? Did we support the Black Lives Matter movement? Others wonder why the protests were happening at all. They focused instead on the violence they witnessed on the news, the toppling of a statue in downtown Chicago by protesters, and looting that took place across the city, causing millions of dollars in damage. Both groups felt frustrated but for entirely different reasons. I don't have to tell the folks that are watching this or our panelists how difficult 2020 was as a year, with the George Floyd murder, with the pandemic, with economic fallout, and the ongoing fight for justice. So as I reflect on the past year and this MLK Day, I keep thinking about our need for what I'm calling a new king. And when I say that, I don't mean some lone savior, hero, Superman, Wonder Woman. I'm talking about the new king as you and the new king as me. Each year around this time, we hearken back to the times of MLK. We say his quotes, we sing, lift every voice and sing, we sing, we shall overcome. But what are we doing as individuals every day to live out Dr. King's legacy? Now more than ever, we need a new king. We need to look inside ourselves and pull out our leadership and our greatness. It's not about Trump, it's not about Biden, it's not about whoever else is in the White House. It's about you and me, ordinary people rising up to do extraordinary things. It's about leveraging each and every opportunity to do some good for yourself, your family, your city, your community, your country. You are the new king. Well, you might say that sounds nice, that's cute. Yeah, okay, we hear what you're saying, but what does it really mean? I think it means caring about your neighbor. You know, when I was growing up, and I've been on this earth for almost a century, but I knew my neighbors and they knew me. I had dozens of play aunts and play uncles that looked out for me, and my family looked out for other families. We cared about each other. That's being a new king. It means caring about your home, your neighborhood. There's an organization called My Block, My Hood, My City that does neighborhood beautification projects. They did Christmas light decorations from 35th and King Drive to 47th and King Drive. They made neighborhoods that are often overlooked look beautiful. Being a new king means serving the homeless, the food insecure. It means exercising your right to vote, having your say in local, state, and federal politics. These things that impact your everyday lives. It means standing up and marching in the face of injustice, raising your voice when you see that something just is not right. In the wake of the horrific riots at the Capitol last week, many ordinary citizens are calling out the people that they saw in those crowds, and they're dropping dime on them for being participants in that. They're identifying people who peddled hate and violence so that they could be brought to justice. I'm convinced that when we lift our voices, there's nothing that we can't do. Our voices elected the first African-American woman as Vice President of the United States. There's nothing we can't do. Being a new king also means educating yourself on COVID-19 and the vaccine, listening to science, not your barber, your beautician, your uncle, your aunt, but science, and then making an informed decision about whether getting vaccinated is the best thing for you and your family. It means looking back and paying homage to Dr. King and the ancestors of the past who brought us this far, but it's also making a decision today about how you will extend their legacy. And this isn't just about young people with years ahead of them. Everybody under the sound of my voice that has breath in their bodies can be the new king. So pick up your crown, do your part. As Mother Teresa once said, and I'm sure Dr. King would agree, faith in action is love, and love in action is service. By transforming that faith into living acts of love, we put ourselves in contact with God Himself and Jesus our Lord. And I don't know about you, but at the end of this journey, at the end of my journey on earth, I for sure want to hear God say to me, "Well done, my good and faithful servant," because I've lived my life as a new king and I did my part to make the world a better place. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our fantastic and amazing panel. when we have these panel discussions and conversations, I'm always just so excited about the wealth of excellence and fabulousness that exists in our Rush family. So I'm going to introduce them to you. And as I call your name, please put your video on so people can see your lovely faces. And I am going to introduce folks in alphabetical order. First, we have Leosha Dobbs. She is the Administrative Project Assistant for the Rush Education and Career Hub, or REACH, which is in the Office of Community Health Equity and Engagement. She is a Human Services major at National Louis University, class of 2021. Woo, graduating this year, hey now. Next, we have Aisha Jaco. Aisha is the Executive Director of Westside United. She leads the organization on its quest to reduce the 16-year life expectancy gap between Chicago's Loop and 10 Westside communities by focusing on economic vitality, education, healthcare, and community economic development. Aisha is a member of Leadership Greater Chicago, class of 2021, hey now. She is the recipient of the 2020 Health and Medicine Policy Research Group Health Award for promoting social justice and challenging inequities in health and healthcare. She's also a 2020 Helen Coburn Meyer and Tim Meyer Achievement Awardee. She's got a master's degree in arts management from Columbia College in Chicago. Welcome, Aisha. Then we have Jalen Lockhart. Jalen is a senior at Whitney Young and has been accepted into Middlebury College. Now I looked that up because I'm nosy, and what I learned was that Middlebury College is ranked in the top 10 of liberal arts colleges across the country. So Ms. Jalen, congratulations on that. She has been a student intern at Rush since 2017 through the Rush MedStem Pathways program. Welcome, Jalen. And then we have Mr. Quincy Stanley, who is currently the Vice President of Hospital Operations for Support Services at Rush. Quincy joined Rush in 2017 as Director in Supply Chain Management, and he then got promoted to Associate Vice President and is now Vice President. Prior to joining Rush, Quincy gained nearly 15 years of supply chain and operations experience in the retail industry and other large healthcare systems, including U of C. He has a Master's of Transportation and Logistics degree from the Sam M. Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. Welcome, Quincy, and I'm looking for your face to come in here somewhere. You'll pop in so everybody can see you. And then last but not least, we have Terry Peterson, who is the Vice President of Corporate and External Affairs at Rush and the chairperson of Rush's Diversity Leadership Council. Mr. Peterson, or Terry, also serves as chairman of the Chicago Transit Authority Board. He was appointed to that position in October of 2009 by Mayor Daley and was retained by Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Terry, his other professional accomplishments, and there are many, includes being CEO of CHA, being an alderman, so he's got that political background, and being an assistant to Mayor Daley and assistant commissioner for the city's Department of Planning and Development. He's got a bachelor's degree from Chicago State and a master's of public health administration from Roosevelt. He's also an alumnus of Harvard University's Graduate School of Design Advanced Management Degree Development Program in real estate. So when I say we got heavy hitters on this panel, like we got heavy hitters on this panel, and they range in age from the young folks to the older folks who shall remain nameless. But here you are, here you are. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm gonna jump into these questions, and I encourage people that are like listening and watching to put your questions and comments in the chat, as Jasmine explained earlier, and we will definitely turn to them as we move forward. So the first question is going to be for Aisha and Terry, so get your minds thinking. Why do you think the death of George Floyd has been such a national and even global catalyst for a new day civil rights activism? Unmute yourself so we can hear what you think.
Yeah, I'll let Aisha go first.
Wow. I think if we fast forward from Emmett Till and that monumental moment in history and the fact that there was no social media, but the power of that visual, the power of his mother, Mamie Till, having that open casket so that the world could see that image. The fact that it was in Jet magazine, Time magazine, it set off a spark and just showed people a reality back in 1955. And so if we fast forward to 2020, this George Floyd, unfortunately, was not the first televised act of brutality at the hands of white police officers assaulting or murdering Black people. And so I think, you know, in the age of social media, where information travels at lightning speed, the fact that everyone, no matter where you were, also saw it stream across the news, everybody had a moment to witness that injustice and that unfairness. And for generations before mine, I'm an 80s baby, or after mine, I should say, we've heard about these atrocities in textbooks, you know, and to see it live and direct in the most accessible medium in the media, I think just uprooted some things that had already been seeded there, that we collected from histories, that we collected from our aunts and uncles, all of those stories, the stories of relatives that have had run-ins with police in their own communities. And it just leveled the injustice that has already been there and brought it to the top. And when you talk about the new king, the new kings rose up and took it to the streets and began to ask questions and demand accountability that I know I've not seen in my lifetime. And it really sparked a series of discussions and actions across the country, across corporations, across different communities, to have us have a hard look at what is new to some Americans, a new awakening of this, and what is so familiar, unfortunately, to all of us. It kind of leveled what so many of us know to be true.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for the history lesson, going back to Emmett Till, because it was shocking at that time to see the picture of his body in that casket. Like that, I think, shaped and changed things. I want to bring Terry into as one of our
older members.
Elders.
One of the elders on the panel. Thank you, Darlene.
Right.
I agree with Aisha in the sense that I'm a product of the 60s. I was born in the late 50s, so I've been around for a while. And I think the difference, if you take a look, as you said, why was it such, a worldwide event? First of all, I think it was just a shock to the system and the spirit of everyone who witnessed in real time someone kneeling on the neck of someone for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and taking the life out of them. And more importantly, I'll tell you what personally touched me. When somebody calls out for their mom, and all of us when you call out for your mom, that was the one point of that incident that I think shook my soul and my spirit, is when he called on his mom to help him. And I think for people to watch that for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and if that didn't shake you to your core, I'm not sure anything else will. And I think social media, being able to see it in real time, being able to hear George Floyd's voice as he was laying there with someone kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Again, I think all of that, but I think it was just, for me, I remember when the civil rights movement, when the nation became aware of what was going on in the South and other parts of this country as it relates to African Americans and how they were being treated. And like you said, fast forward, 2020, we're witnessing it on social media. So I think that's why worldwide it had such an impact, a profound impact. And it's also why you saw marches taking place all over the world as a result of this event, was because people had a chance to see it in real time, witness it. And like I said, I just think it shook the core of everyone who had an opportunity to see it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I agree with all of that. I can't bring myself to watch that video. I can't do it. And, even like what you were saying about him calling out for his mom, like I'm getting choked up just thinking about it. I just can't do it. You and I and many others at Rush over the summer were at a service event that was put on by Alderman Scott, and we kneeled. Remember that? We kneeled for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And during that time, I just kept thinking, one, how awful that was. 8 minutes and 46 seconds is a long time. And how at any point during that time, if that police officer had removed his knee from the neck of George Floyd would be living today.
Exactly.
That just, rocks me to my core. So I want to transition and bring in some of our young folks, because I'm, always so interested to know about you all's perspectives and what you all are seeing. Because I think it's one thing to talk about what happened in the 60s with civil rights, is another thing to talk about what's happening right now with Black Lives Matter and the current, social justice activism that's happening. So what role do you think young people can play in the current movement for racial justice? And I'll start with you, Leoshay, and then we'll come to you, Jalen.
So the role I feel is becoming the next leader of change. Staying woke, staying focused, not letting anything or anyone distract your mission, your vision, being true to yourself and having the moral ethic behaviors of being honest and also having moral courage to stand up for yourself and others.
What about you, Jalen?
I think that young people, really from the beginning of the civil rights movement, have a place. Like if you think about the Little Rock Nine, there were students around 14-year-old have to maintain a stoic face, even in the face of many people acting extremely racist towards them. So nowadays we look toward the fight for racial equality. I think that we're still in the center of this fight, and students nowadays, we have the internet, social media to really reach out to other young people who may not really have the knowledge or the experience that people who are actively living every day, having to see the effects of racism and other aspects of discrimination affecting their own lives. I think that young people especially have that opportunity to use social media and the internet to reach out and educate others in that way.
Yeah. A couple of things as you're talking made me think about this episode of Blackish, where they're talking about the different styles of protest. So you got, Dre, who's in his 40s, talking about how he went to Howard and they marched and, put in all this hard sweat equity. And then you have his son, Junior, who's doing the social media thing and doing posts on Instagram. And the older Dre is you all aren't doing real activism. What does it take to tweet something out? Instagram, that doesn't matter. But the reality is that there are always different ways to get the word out and to raise your voice and to be heard and to be an activist. And sometimes the things of the past may not work for what's happening right now. So we've got to be flexible with that. So, and then also we have to remember too, that back in the civil rights time, Dr. King wasn't old. The people that were around, they were young as well. And so I think young people are really oftentimes the center of the movement. I even think about Rush students now that are, pushing to see justice within the university and across Rush. So one, we got to be careful how we're defining young, and two, they've always been at the center of the movement. So Quincy, I'm getting ready to turn to you now. When it comes to racial justice, equity, and social change, in addition to Dr. King, what other leaders do you admire? Who else stands out for you and why?
That's a really tough question because there are so many great leaders out there. But, I'll call out, one leader that has just recently passed, John Lewis. And the reason I would mention him because the statement of getting into good trouble, that really hits home to me in a lot of different ways, because again, that means doing something that that's right, and it's the right thing to do regardless if others don't agree with it. So everybody have their interpretation of what it can mean, but to me, I can see that being used everywhere, especially when it comes to racial injustice or just racism in general, right? I think in order for us to make any progress, we all have to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations to move forward. And it's not just, African Americans, also, our white brothers and sisters, because again, they have to be uncomfortable to address these sort of issues. And we sometimes have to be uncomfortable to hold them accountable to addressing those issues. So that really John Lewis really stands out to me, because getting into good trouble is what we need to continue to do. Even though we know it may go against the grain, it may go against the majority, but if it's the right thing to do, we should do it. Speaking to the young generation, there are a lot of, some of our younger brothers and sisters who have friends of all different, racial backgrounds. And I'm seeing a lot of social media posts of little young, little white kids, really going against their parents and exposing them for doing evil things. That's getting into good trouble, right? I mean, that's those kids are seeing things differently. The younger generation are trying to progress in the right way, which is why it's so important that they stay engaged, because we have to take a step. We got to keep the momentum going. It hasn't stopped yet. And, to the previous question, the first question about George Floyd, to me, that just uncovered a lot of what a lot of individuals thought was gone or didn't exist. That's what that did for me. I think we have this tendency to think that racism doesn't exist sometimes for some people, and that was a prime example of, yes, it does, and it's exposed. And imagine what we haven't seen, right? So just to get back to my question, Darlene, getting into good trouble from John Lewis is really, really important. It can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but that's what we need to continue to do.
Thank you for that. So much to unpack, like you're talking, and lots of questions are popping in my head. I love your reference to John Lewis, because he is a superhero to me. And he definitely talked about getting in good trouble. He also talked about the power of the vote, and how engaging in democracy and voting is a verb. Get yourself out there and do something. And I thought about him a lot as I watched the Georgia returns come in and saw, a Jewish man and a Black man going to the Senate. Hello, like John Lewis must be smiling down. And then I also, like what you said about, the George Floyd's murder being like an awakening, for some people. Then and now, in the wake of last week, a lot of people have been saying, well, this isn't who we are, like, I can't believe these things are happening. This isn't who America is. I beg to differ with that. I mean, the country was founded on slavery. This is who we've always been. We can aspire to be better and should aspire to be better. But injustice and discrimination and oppression of people of color is baked into the DNA and soil of this country, and we need to have a reckoning and accept that to be true. All right, that's enough of my soapbox. I want to move on and hear from some other folks about leaders that,
before you move on, if I could do a plug that I would encourage everyone to watch. There's an HBO documentary called King in the Wilderness. And when you talk about outside of Dr. King, who else I would admire? The thousands of heroes and sheroes whose name we will never know behind the scene, who marched with Dr. King, went out and ended up doing the advanced work prior to the marches taking place. And I would encourage everyone, please take a look at this HBO documentary called King in the Wilderness, because it also speaks to Dr. King, the pain, and how he wrestled internally with this. And it talks about those who he thought were friends walking away from it. And, it's really, if you really want to get, I think, a true appreciation for Dr. King, watching this documentary, and you've got Harry Belafonte as one of the narrators of it, it's just really an eye opener for me. And I think we could always name Paul Robeson, Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, but when you look at this documentary, you will see, as I said before, the thousands of men and women, Black and white, Hispanic, who marched, who worked behind the scenes, whose names we will never know, that should also be lifted up as creating the infrastructure and whose shoulders we stand on today.
I'm gonna have to watch that documentary, Terry, because I think this is maybe the second time that you mentioned it. So it must have, I mean, it clearly had an impact on you. So I'm gonna make it my business to watch it this weekend. I want to ask Aisha, Jalen, and Leoshay the same question. Like, who are the leaders that you admire in this social justice struggle? Leoshay, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Aisha, and then we'll go to Jalen.
So as I was processing this question, the same as Quincy, I'm like, oh, it's so many people, like so many people. So I decided to go with Harriet Tubman. And I went with her just because the simple fact that she built community. Like she helped everyone, like, you know, get committed, and having like, even like her taking the effort to actually want to be a part, like, you know, communities and having everyone get together. It just showed. And then she had 5 traits that I would definitely like say I would want in a leader. And it was like the honesty and the support were the main two for me, because she was like always the person who would go to for commitment and building community. So I would definitely have to go with Harriet Tubman.
You know, when you said that, the word that popped in my head was courage. How much courage did it take to do what she did, right? I mean, total courage. Aisha, what about you? What leaders do you admire?
When you talk about putting on the new crown, I think about the jewels in that crown. And the jewels for me represent the people that have come before. So similar to Leoshay's reference to Harriet Tubman, I am inspired by Al Raby and all of the amazing work that he did. And we talk about, Terry, the people who were on the sidelines or that did a lot of the prefacing for the important work. He was definitely one. Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Fisher, Cesar Chavez, Lorraine Hansberry, and her work in literature and what that brought to the conversation around housing discrimination and how it opened doors. Toni Morrison, A. Philip Randolph with the Pullman Porters and that movement. He was also instrumental with the March on Washington. And then current day, Stacey Abrams, here in Chicago, my sisters over in Inglewood, Aisha Butler, Tanika Johnson, and then Rami Nashashibi, and who, you know, his work is right down the street from Marquette Park where King marched. And, you know, he was instrumental along with others with getting a monument to kind of mark the space and the sweat equity from that day. So, you know, it's definitely quite a few people, but those were some that came to mind.
Yeah, I love that shout out to Rami. Like he is one of my favorites. As a total social activist, you know, in the neighborhood, lives in the neighborhood, just really, you know, but making things happen in Chicago lawn. So, and I love the mention of younger or present day people as well, because we have definitely a history of ancestors that have lifted up the movement and have been incredible. And then we have people in present day that have kind of taken that mantle and are doing amazing work. Jalen, your thoughts on this one?
Well, this question was really hard for me to answer because, like everyone mentioned, Stacey Abrams extremely influential in the Georgia election, which was successful, and so many others. But I just want to point out one person, Van Jones. You might know him since he's a CNN commentator. He is very influential. He created several activism groups and other justice organizations. So I'd like to just shout him out. But this question is extremely difficult. So that's just one person.
Yeah.
Darlene, one more shout out.
Oh, please go.
Brian Stevenson, who said somebody has to stand when other people are sitting, and somebody has to speak when other people are quiet. I don't know if those on the panel have had a chance to go down to Alabama, but if you go down and take a look at the museum, the history of lynching of African Americans in this country, you're talking about a new leader who's I think is a huge voice today. Brian Stevenson would be another name that I would throw in the mix in terms of the new generation of kings that are going to continue to move us forward.
Yeah, and what I love about this question, and it's been demonstrated by everybody's answer, is that there's so many people we can point to. You know, there are a lot of new kings out there that we can point to. Like others have said, I want to shout out Stacey Abrams, but also the other Black women activists in Georgia that helped. You know, they were also doing that grassroots community organizing work to help get out the vote. And then lastly, I'll put in a plug or a shout out to one of my new media favorites, Abby Phillips, who is also on, I believe she's on CNN. I watched her during the vote count. And one of the things she said really struck me because they were talking about voting and people coming out even in the midst of COVID. And I love just like her calm style. And she said it was people of color that are like making Biden win. They were literally voting for their lives. And that touched me because it's just so true. Like people didn't care if it was COVID-19. I'm gonna still either vote early, I'm gonna stand out here with my mask, I'm gonna make it happen. So Abby Phillips is one of my faves. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris that are coming in. So Terry, I'm going to turn to you first, Mr. Government Affairs, Mr. Former Alderman, Mr. Chairman of CTA Board. If you could have a sit-down conversation right now with Biden and Harris about racial justice and systemic racism, what would you say and what would you ask of this new administration who, let me look at my watch and time, is going to be sworn in 5 days? Yes. Praise them. So go ahead.
Well, one, I would say to both President Biden and Vice President Harris, first of all, we don't need any more studies. We don't need any more commissions. There are enough North Star plans on the shelf to address the structural racism and injustice that has dominated so many parts of this country. And I'll give you, what do we need? We need better housing, education system, economic development, creation of small businesses in Black and brown communities, able to get access to loans. So that's what I would say to them in short order, is that we don't need any more studies, no more commissions. We know what the challenges are. We know what's going on in these communities where structural racism over the years, disinvestments in these communities. We know what the education system is like in these communities. And if we don't start to invest in our young people, invest in our education system, and we don't provide better access to better housing, to better healthcare, and we don't start to eliminate the food deserts that exist in our community, if we don't start instilling hope in our young people that there's a future for them, then guess what? It doesn't matter about all the talk and all of the rhetoric and all the great speeches. We now have to put resources behind each of those efforts if we really want to turn things around and make this the America that we all dream and hope that it can become.
I love that. We don't need another study. I don't need a committee. I don't need another data point. You don't have to tell me that there's health disparities between whites and people. Like we know all that. Quincy, what about you? What would you tell this new administration?
No, I mean, Terry brought up a great point. I mean, and just to piggyback off you as well, Darlene, we don't need anything else to be done. And I'm a data-driven guy. I like to make decisions off data, right? We don't need any more data. I think, again, if these 4 years haven't, showed, these past 4 years, I should say, haven't showed you what state we are in from a racism perspective, in terms of the importance of equality and equity, I don't know if any other information can open your eyes. So if I'm sitting down with President-elect Biden and Vice President Harris, I'm with Terry. I want to see an action plan pertaining, honestly, to the African American community. I know as the president, I understand how important it is to make sure you look at things from a holistic point of view, because you represent the entire country. But we're tired. I'm tired. And what we're seeing through social media and all of the incidents that have happened outside of COVID, but just to our community and to African Americans over the past 4 years, I mean, there is no reason why we can't have our own agenda at this point in terms of addressing equality and equity. So I need to see an action plan around that. Me personally, as part of that action plan, I would like to see the entire police department holistically be completely overhauled. I don't know how it needs to be done, but it needs to be. I'm not saying we can have the same number of police. I just want them to be vetted properly. And to ensure that we know how police were created. And a lot of that, it was to keep Black people in check. And a lot of that obviously continues to happen today. So I think there needs to be almost a federal approach to ensuring people who are supposed to protect and serve our communities are qualified. And that's just one of many action items in addition to what Terry just alluded to. So I need an action plan that's geared towards my African American brothers and sisters. I'm sorry, I know you're responsible for the country, but we need our own agenda at this point.
Leo Shay, you want to jump in on that? I see you took yourself off mute. No? Okay. A couple of things in response to that, Quincy. In my neighborhood, there's a big billboard that says, "You're welcome, America," and then it says signed by Black women. Which I love because, Stacey Abrams and everybody else down in Georgia that was doing this community organizing, Kamala Harris being on the political trail supporting Biden, 98% of Black women voters showed up to vote in this election. So, I want some reparation when it comes to Black women. Give us some acknowledgement, some shout out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Put us in leadership position, like all of these things. Recognize, what we have done. I also want to do like a quick history note for folks, because you were talking about the police. There are certainly historical references to this grew out of slave owners putting a group or mob of folks together to catch the enslaved that had run away. And so that's some of the foundational history of the police in various areas across the country. And so I'm big on origin stories and how things start and how it's very difficult to move away from origin stories. While we know, of course, not all cops are bad, we know that.
Right.
But there are some that show up to the Capitol and tear stuff up.
Yep.
Just saying. All right, Aisha, you want to follow up on that, Quincy?
No, you're absolutely right. And that's not what I'm saying either, Darlene, in terms of all cops are not bad. We just there are just a few we need to weed out. And again, I feel like there's a lot of leeway. I'm from the South, I'm from Arkansas. And I can tell you now, there are a lot of police officers that are not qualified. A lot of the ones that are police officers from my hometown are those that couldn't do anything else, to be honest with you. So again, that's why it's so important that, there's a process that properly vet those that's supposed to protect and serve us and to ensure they don't have a negative agenda, which I think a lot of them out there do. So again, no, I'm not saying all cops are bad. A lot of my friends are officers, but we need to make sure we have the right people in the right job.
Terry, you look like you had something to say about that as well. I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, well, one of the things, and this is just so to sort of follow up with what Quincy said, and I think for those who are part of this town hall, when I leave here, I don't wear a suit. If you see me on weekends, I got a baseball cap, polo shirt, and some blue jeans on. And I've been stopped, I've been followed when I go see my mom out at 79th South at Normal, going to see my godmother at 69th Street. And as Quincy said, I've got a lot of friends who are part of Chicago Police Department. I know they are good officers, but I also know there are those who unfortunately patrol our community looking for a way to harass African-American men, African-American women. And I totally agree, there needs to be a better vetting of, I think, those who are supposed to serve and protect us. And that's the only way I think you're going to get back the police and the community relationship back where it needs to be, is to see those kind of structural changes within the police department kind of going forward.
Yeah, agree 100%. Aisha, I'm going to turn to you as we move on to our next question. And that is, given the recent divisiveness around Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and civil rights overall, you got some folks that are tearing up Capitol buildings and doing all kinds of stuff. Given that, how do we heal our country? Can we heal our country at this point? What do you think?
Wow.
Come on, you're all peace and love and let's all get along. That's why I'm asking you the question.
I believe that, but I think one of the key parts in starting the healing journey is honesty. And so having that honest look at, the current state of affairs and where those roots are, trying to understand the thought process of those that led the insurrection, trying to have them understand, the plight of African Americans, or just the hate and things that, are perpetuated from a white supremacist lens. I think it's going to take a lot of work to unpack, but I do think that anything is possible, but it is going to take a lift and it is going to take work. And to your point earlier around no more studies, no more research, we have so many blueprints left, from people like Dr. Martin Luther King, who in 1967 really quickly said, we also know no matter how dynamically the economy develops and expands, it does not eliminate all poverty. We must create full employment. We must create incomes. People must be made consumers by one method or the other. This is the work of Westside United 54 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then in his message, it was nonviolence, it was peace, teaching just as what was demonstrated in some instances by the Black Lives Matters folks, or those that did take an approach, Terry, that's similar to what you knew, what Dre knew on Blackish, to do that march, to have that presence, right, where they didn't loot, they didn't tear up. And then you also have, folks that did take their rage and have looting be that one voice that they felt like they could get attention with. And then you have the rioters who have this privilege, or I'm sorry, the insurrectionists who have their viewpoints. And so I think, it's just going to take a lot of honesty. I don't know how we're going to all get around the table when you think about the different factions, but, I'm speechless on that.
Yeah. Jalen, what do you think? And I'll come to you, Leo Shea. You look like you wanted to say something as well. How do we heal, Jalen? What do you think?
Well, this is a very difficult question, but at least from what I see in my school, with people, I go to a very diverse school. That means that I have people who are sort of on all sides, people who are conservative in the same class with kids who are very liberal. So I think a big part about bridging that divide is just having conversations and at least hearing the other person's side. And even if, although sometimes, let me just say, that divide can't be conquered. If a person doesn't believe that if Black lives don't matter, then that's sort of something that it's very difficult to bridge across.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a big part of that, of still being able to have a country, is just being able to make concessions in ways that make sense, and otherwise just it can't happen anymore. So, and yeah, and just police, please, let's just reform the police, since that's a big part of the Black Lives Matter movement. And that goes in vetting the people who are becoming police officers, and also having recourse for when brutality or other problems within the police, that stuff does happen.
Accountability is really important. Leo Shea, what do you think? Can we heal?
I personally feel like we could, if we can just look towards what the future could bring. So basically, like, the knowledge that we have from history, using it today to build a brighter future. So it's like, instead of, like you guys were saying, like, all the data, the numbers and everything, it's like, okay, we got that. So that's the knowledge. How can we use all of that to, like, get towards the issues, the social issues. Like, how can we use what we already know to make a brighter future? I feel like that can actually heal our country.
Yeah, I appreciate that, like being forward thinking, future thinking. I will say one of the things that frightens me is that fright may be too strong because I'm, a woman of God. So we're supposed to have faith over fear. So I won't use that word. But one of the things that I'm seeing that's of concern is a lot of people aren't willing or ready to turn the other cheek, be that whatever color they are, conservative, not whatever, Black folks, white folks. Like some people are just like, okay, like we're tired and I'm not turning the other cheek. I don't believe in nonviolence, and it's something's going to happen. So the concern I have is those two factions kind of coming together and not being in a spirit of healing, but it being in a spirit of more violence. Yeah, I'll just leave that at that. So I'm going to remind people who are watching and listening to us that we want you to be a part of the conversation. So please put your questions, comments, because I know y'all are thinking stuff. There's probably some neck rolling going on and some amen choir and all kinds of stuff. Or you might disagree with what we're saying. How dare they talk about the police? I don't know. And we won't know unless you share what you think. And then as we finish up our questions here, we will certainly turn to the questions and things that you all have raised in the chat. All right, let's keep it going. So, this is a generational question. I love this. And I will turn to you first, Jalen, and then come to Leoshe. So how do you think your values on racial equity differ in your generation from those of your grandparents or your parents' generation? Again, like, are you having that Dre Jr., competition about what true activism looks like? What do you think, Jalen?
I think Blackish really did describe it well when describing like the difference between my grandparents or parents' generation. So whereas my parents or grandparents' generation was mostly focused on legal equality, such as like the ability to vote, having equal opportunities to get jobs, like no discrimination in that sense. What the younger people are focused on is not, since we already have those rights, we can vote, just like it's not necessarily strictly codified in law that discrimination is okay anymore. But what we're fighting for is social equality at this point. So that means equity in the social sense, and which is kind of difficult to describe since it could be different for different people. But I think that's mainly the difference. And social equality, we do that in a different way, as described by Blackish, online, social media, which sometimes our grandparents' generation doesn't really get. Like
what is that tweet? What is that Insta?
You guys are using the book face or something like that to protest. Doesn't really make it right. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to divide, but we're basically going for the same things. We just want basically just to be treated as people in work, in school. We're all fighting for the same things. We're just doing it in a different way.
What about you, Leoshe?
I definitely agree because I'm like really big on social media. So like a lot of like friends that I have are not really big speakers. So they will be thinking something that will be so good, but you would never hear from them. But like if you go through social media, Facebook, Twitter, and someone make a post, you will see them the first comment like preaching. And I'm like, oh, why you just didn't say that? If that's how you felt. So I'm really big on that. And I feel like my grandma, she always like, oh, why do you take everything to social media? It's like, because I want to see the viewpoints of like, people in my generation, how they really feel, because they're scared, like to take a stand. They're scared of what people might think of them, or like, if they stand something wrong, so I just want to know like the viewpoint of everyone else. So that's like the difference between the generations from my grandparents and me.
That's helpful. Terry, I want to ask you this question because I'm just thinking about some of the work that we've been doing with the Racial Justice Action Committee and some of the Rush students, and how like they're really pushing for certain things. And then, you and I are a little more seasoned, and we're like thinking about how do you balance, the things that they're pushing for with other like considerations. So what do you think about, what do you think are the differences between activism today and what our parents and grandparents were doing?
Well, I think if you think, and again, remember this, I grew up in the South in Tennessee doing segregation. I couldn't go to the school a block away, couldn't play in the parks, probably till sometime in the late 60s. So again, and I was raised by my grandparents on a farm. And as I think about my grandparents, as well as my mom, you know, a lot of times they suffered in silence. And they suffered in silence because one, they wanted to make sure, they said they didn't want anything to happen to us. And not only that, but they were working hard, suffering in silence, hoping to create a better future for their children. I think today, fast forward, when you talk about our grandparents, our parents, and then you talk about our generation, one of the things that I always say to young people today is that you've got to be able to move from protest to policy. You can get all mad all you want to. You can jump up and down, but if you don't move from protest to policy, to change things, if you go back and take a look, whether it's the civil rights legislation, you go back through the history of this country, any gains that we've made, it is at some point in time come through legislation. And so, you know, again, what I love about our young people today, I love they're smart, I love their energy, I love their creativity. They have no fear. You know, I was just, you know, again, I think that's probably one of the difference that you and I have been around for a while. We've been part of these conversations growing up. We've sit in the room with different leaders, and you know, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. For me, I've had numerous meetings growing up. I just had so many heroes and sheroes, and I remember hearing them say at the end of the day, after we would get back from a march or anything, or Father Mike Flake, they would come back and say, okay, now what elected official we need to meet with to advance this? What elected official should move this piece of legislation? Call in. So moving from protest to policy is so important. And like I said, I just love our young people in terms of their approach today. But I will say this, always find a way to connect to those who have a little experience that can help guide you in terms of some of the pitfalls and the potholes that sometimes exist along this journey of trying to address structural racism, injustice, inequality, and all of those issues that basically we've been dealing with for, you know, I don't even know to count the years. You could say 400 years or longer. So.
Yeah. So I want to ask Quincy and Aisha the same question, but something struck me, Jalen, as you were talking too about kind of the differences between the movements, like our ancestors in the 60s and before that were fighting for just like basic equity. Can I show up at a store and get service? Can I send my kid to the school of my choice? Can I exercise my right to vote and have a say in politics that impact my life? So like the fundamental basics. And now it's like the fight seems to be one, to hold on to that stuff, because as we can see, things can go back if we're not diligent. But then there's also this, it's that plus, like it's the basics plus. It's being able to show up as your true self with your hairstyles and however it is you want to represent yourself. It's like, it's the plus. And I think that that's awesome, because why should we have to, what's what I'm looking for, accept like whatever is good? Like, why should we have to settle for the basics? Like, we want it all. Like, there's as much talent, beauty, fabulousness, and wonderfulness in people of color as there are in non-people of color. And I really think that our society misses out on the creative genius that lives within BIPOC when they don't tap into that. So Quincy, I'm gonna turn it over to you. What do you think about the generational differences? And then Aisha, you can close us out on this question.
Yeah, Darlene, I think you hit the nail on the head. That was exactly my point. I think we're constant. We're still fighting for the same thing overall. Actually, you know, obviously, and that's to not be discriminated against. But I think there are a couple of things we have to take into consideration on this question. Is one, I mean, we're always going to be a product of our time. So whatever platform we have or tools and resources we have to actually protest, you know, it's two different times, right? I think we approach those differently, obviously, given modern day technology versus what my grandmother, my grandparents or great grandparents had access to. And the second point is Darlene, kind of what you were alluding to in terms of, you know, I think the frequency of things that needed to be fought for obviously it was right in the face of our ancestors, versus we're in an environment where we know it exists and sometimes it's gray and we have to uncover it and tackle it every day, or something happens through social media that gets us all riled up and we start to tackle it, right? So it's kind of two different ways of approaching the same issue. We can't lose sight of the fight. You're right. I think the same energy needs to, and this goes back to Darlene, your point of being a king and a queen and on a day-to-day basis. The fight needs to continue every single day. We shouldn't lose momentum after, a George Floyd incident and we come in and we're going hard and it dies down. It doesn't have to be a protest all the time, but when we go into work and when we go into these different places, let's not lose sight of who we are and what we're fighting for and hold true to that. So I think that's the action that we have to take today, as opposed to sort of our ancestors where, man, it was, like you said, it was hard to go to the store. So that fight was not to uncover certain things to fight. It was right there in their face. And, it's the same big fight. It's just approached in a different way.
For that. Aisha, your thoughts?
Yes. All right, couldn't unmute. So for me, when I think about my grandmother, her biggest sign of protest was fleeing the South, Mississippi Delta, to come to Chicago to make a better life for her children. But what she encountered was just a different form of Jim Crow, a little bit more sophisticated. And then when I think about my mom, she came to Chicago a month after the riots, after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, to the North Lawndale community. And she was in shock, just having a difference, being a country gal to now seeing the city. And then just, what she encountered was not this nirvana that my grandmother and great aunts thought. There were inequities that she approached. My grandmother and her sisters thought that the Panthers were gangsters because of the rhetoric and them with the guns. My mother delved in to see that the work that they were doing with the breakfast program, et cetera. So there was that. Then you had my dad across the way in the Robert Taylor projects, after coming home from Vietnam, becoming a Panther to help, get evolved into some of the things that he saw as problems in his community that he wanted to address. You fast forward to my generation, I inherited a disinvested West Side that was never rebuilt from the riots. And so I'm there with my siblings and we're trying to figure out, how we bring about change. I have a younger brother who's a musician who used music as his platform. And when you talk about protest and policy, Terry, he was thought to be controversial. His label at the time held his record. They wouldn't release it. And he did a protest. And all of his fans came and they changed the way music was released to some degree. For me, it was working with Hydea Pendleton and her family to stand up Project Orange Tree, which is now the Wear Orange movement, which is national. And then I look at my little sisters who are home with me, they're college women, 20 and 21. They started something called the Chicago Protest Movement. And so, it is just this evolution with them. They have more resources, social media, a broader way to get things out, more so than my parents did. And my grandmother, again, hers was just making the move up north. So there's just a variance in what was in front of us and what we had access to bring about that change.
So much to unpack in all of these responses. And BTW, for those who don't know, when Aisha says her brother who's doing activism through his music, her brother is Lupe Fiasco, Grammy Award winning artist. So much to unpack in that. Quincy, when you were talking about back in the day and what our ancestors had to go through and how, people were talking about Jim Crow. There was this quote that I read that says Jim Crow isn't dead. He just went to law school, meet Mr. Crow Esquire, right? So it's things are kind of baked into our policies from a systemic, it's more subtle now. It's not in your face. Jim Crow does sneaky things like voter suppression. Jim Crow does a lot of things, still exists today, still fighting against him, but he just has changed his tactics. I'm also thinking a lot about Colin Kaepernick and how that kneeling completely changed the trajectory of his career. You know, it was so controversial. Oh, you're kneeling against our flag. You know, don't respect our country and all of that. He was vilified, you know, just vilified. That was his form of protest, though, you know, and now people are coming around and, you know, seeing that for what it was, an honest critique of this country, you know, and the things that we're doing, especially when it comes to Black men. All right, let's move on. Got a couple more questions. Our time is like flittering away, which always happens when you're having a really good conversation. And we haven't even gotten to questions from other people that are watching yet. So that's going to go by fast as well. So next question is kind of related to what we've been talking about all along, but considering the legacy of MLK, what do you think needs to happen to improve racial equity? And I'll frame it a little differently. What is your vision for a more just and equitable country? And I will start with, y'all look like you're thinking, do, 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 do. I'll start with you, Terry, for that one.
Well, a couple of things for me, and I sort of had three things that I thought we needed to do. First of all, we need to listen. We need to talk, and we need to collaborate. And I start with listen because I think people don't understand the value of that leadership skill. You're never going to be able to just advance what you want to accomplish without listening to others' point of view. And then, so after you listen, you then got to figure out what are the things that you really agree on. Sometimes we agree on 90% of the things we're talking about, but we get bogged down on the 5% and we can never move forward. And then collaborate. These issues are so huge and they've been around for so long. No one person, no one entity is going to be able to solve this without partnering and collaborating with others to advance this work and create the kind of society that we want to see, to deal with the inequities, to deal with all of the problems that we've been talking about for the last hour or so that exist in this country and in this world. So those would be the three things to be: listen, talk, collaborate, partner, because that's the only way I believe we're going to move this country forward. It's the only way we're going to heal. And at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to bring everybody along. That's just life. I don't agree with everyone in my household in terms of when we're talking about certain subjects. So this isn't about trying to get a complete, 100% consensus on what we want to do, but you've got to be able to listen, to talk, and then bring other folks under the tent to be able to work, to go forward and work on these issues.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think listening has become so hard, because people don't listen to understand, they listen to critique and get the clap back, right? So it's almost like you have to have a spiritual change and evolution in how you're dealing with people and hearing people to be able to make real progress, because everybody's mad and everybody is listening to their own kind of talking heads that are agreeing with everything that they already think. And so I agree, we do need to listen more and listen to understand. And I also agree with you said about you might agree on 95% of things, but you're arguing about the 5%. Let it go. But there's also this idea of collaboration and coordination and multiple stakeholders is kind of the root and foundation of Westside United. So Aisha, talk a little bit about the importance of collaboration to move an agenda forward and kind of get at that racial equity.
Sure. So with the model of Westside United, it's really, asset-based, bringing together, first and foremost, folks that have a moral consciousness or an industry to say, you know what, we've not been doing this right. We've neglected who we've served traditionally over the past 100 plus years. We got to do it different. And so having that epiphany and to have power brokers come around the table to humble themselves, to do the work, to have the honest conversations, to then bring in the people that are impacted by that. So when you talk about collaboration, bringing together community voice has been key and critical to our success. And if you see that happening across if we can influence, which we are, other industries to begin that. I think also what we saw with George Floyd and Black Lives Matters and all these corporations and companies releasing statements about, being more mindful about their practices and equity, it almost seems trendy, but the hard work in that is to have staying power and to really hold yourself accountable to what that means. And I think Westside United does that. Community trusts us in that journey, and we're moving forward in that. So I think that's the hard work that people have to take, people of influence from our government on beyond, listening, coming around the table, rolling up their sleeves, doing what they say they're going to do. So it's a lot of pieces that ignite that racial equity piece, but it starts with that honesty and the ability to correct and move on what you know to be true, united. And so to me, that's the beauty of our work, and just look forward to continuing in that space and the time in which we find ourselves.
Yeah, thank you for that. Quincy, what about you? And then I'm going to come to Leosha and Jalen to close us out on this question. But what is your vision for racial equity? What do you think needs to happen?
What I think needs to happen, and I kind of piggyback off of Terry, I think we need to make sure that, and I know that we do, and when I said make sure everyone recognizes that there's a problem and there is an issue with equity and equality, they need to understand that there is an issue with equity and equality, first and foremost. And after that, I think that's when discussions have to happen, and they're going to be uncomfortable discussions. That's when daily activity that will probably even make yourselves uncomfortable needs to happen, meaning being your authentic self, because we have to get to a point where everyone celebrates everyone's differences. And we have to get to a point where we eat at that deeply rooted issue that you alluded to earlier, Darlene, that some people don't think they have. It's subconscious. They don't, there are a lot of individuals don't believe their race, like coming off as racist when they actually are. Like, I think we have to get to that. And in order to get to the root cause of that, I'm sorry, but the majority has to think about this every single day when they get up. Am I approaching, my colleagues? Am I approaching my Black brothers and sisters in a way that doesn't come off from a place that has been deeply rooted in this country? And I think that's going to cause them to be uncomfortable. Just like what we do every day in order to try to adapt to an environment that may not be us, to actually progress, we have to stop doing that. We have to remain ourselves, and it's going to cause us to be uncomfortable. That's why I keep saying good trouble, because we're all going to have to be uncomfortable in order to address this issue. Some people don't even think it's an issue. And for those who don't think it's an issue, they need to think about it every single day when they get up to ensure that's not the case. Because at the end of it, if we're doing that, you're either an evil person or you have a good heart. That's what it needs to boil down to. It doesn't need to be, I'm not racist, but subconsciously you're doing racist things, right? If, to Terry's point, if I take my suit off at work and I walk through your neighborhood with my hood on, you're gonna approach me a different way because of the color of my skin. Period.
You could have the suit on. You could
have the suit on. Absolutely, darling. So we got to we got to dig at the root of this. It's going to cause consistency from us as Black, brothers and sisters. Don't change who we are. Stay authentic. And for our white brothers and sisters, think about it every day when you get up in the morning, like every single day. And that's how, and those discussions have to happen. And then I think we can move to really solving equity and equality.
Yeah, I love what you said. I had to give you the snaps about this notion of being uncomfortable. Like, we don't want to have these deep conversations. We don't want to do the work that it takes to have true change. We want to move from a moment to an actual movement. We don't want to move from a hashtag to actually changing policies because it makes us uncomfortable. And, I've been honest, like, I'm uncomfortable every day as a Black person showing up in white spaces every time. I'm uncomfortable every day when I'm planning to go somewhere or go to different spaces, and I have to think about, I wonder if I'm going to be accepted in this space. Is something racist going to happen to me today? I wonder why that decision was made. Does that have to do with my race? I'm uncomfortable every day. So come on, everybody, join. Let's be uncomfortable together. and
There
fix
you go.
things so that none of us have to be uncomfortable. But that's,
Yep.
that's just the way it is. So I really appreciate what you said. And then I want to bring in Jalen and Leosha to just kind of talk about their vision for equity. We got 5 minutes, so y'all got about 2 minutes apiece. And then we're going to dive into this chat and see what everybody else has to say. But I'll start with you, Jalen. What's your vision for racial equity? What do you think needs to change?
Yeah, so I think I should just say a quote by Martin Luther King. He said that poverty is violence, unemployment is violence, and lack of education and hope are violence. So I think a big part of racial equity is economic equality. So that is such a big part of being able to live as basically having the same opportunities from a younger age. And I think a big part of that is investing in Black communities. From education, if you don't have a education, how will you live to become the next king or queen or any of that? It can still happen, but it'll be more difficult. So whether that is investing in schools, investing in having adequate health care so that people can live to the point where they can be successful, and just have the same opportunities. So I think a big part of racial equality is economic justice.
I agree. Leosha, your thoughts? What do we need to be doing? What's your vision?
I agree with everything you said, Darlene, about being uncomfortable every day. Because I'm like one of the people like to have my hair different colors, like do different things. Like I have just different personalities. And I would think like before I go, like, would I be accepted? What would they think? Like, oh, if it's like a job interview or something, like, okay, would I not get the job because of this? It's like every day just uncomfortable. But something that I think that needs to change is having more diverse communities. So like showing up and like a white person showing up in a Black community, how they will feel like very uncomfortable. And to add on to what Quincy's saying, it's like we all have to be uncomfortable to actually get somewhere. So it's like Black people showing up in a white communities, we're like uncomfortable. So I feel like that would be a start. And it's just like having more diverse communities, giving Blacks the opportunity, to live in white communities and the opportunity to live in Black communities. And there we can solve like many issues because they will see personally of like what's taking place on both sides.
Just the fact that there exists Black communities and white communities is really something. Like every 3 years, we do community health needs assessments for Rush. And like we look at demographics, and there are communities that are 95, 98% Black. And there are other communities that are on the opposite end of the spectrum. The separation of races has been so ingrained in our policies and the way that we live. Like it would be a utopia if everybody could just kind of come together and live together in spaces. So I love the idea of diverse communities. I think that that's definitely on point. So we're starting to get some comments in the chat. Unfortunately, Aisha had a hard stop at 1, so she won't be joining us for this portion. But we've got a couple of things in the chat to talk about for the next 15 minutes with everybody else that's here, and I'm going to jump to it right now. This one kind of struck me. Matt Hale invited the KKK to Bradley University when I was a student. It's a comment that somebody put in. All right, history lesson. I was at Bradley University when he invited the KKK to come and speak. And we had a large Black student population at that time. This was in the late 80s. And we did our own protests to having him, bring them to Bradley. And then I'll also tell you something folks don't know. I dropped dime on Mr. Hale when he was applying to be a lawyer through the Illinois Supreme Court. And there was a question about your fitness to be an attorney. And I, sent in a letter talking about his racist views and what had happened at Bradley, and just kind of pushed back on him being able to be licensed as an attorney. So yeah, I remember that very well, very controversial, but it brought the Black community together at Bradley. All right, next comment here. Reading caste, do you see a way to move away from a caste system? So, what do you all think? Like, we're going to be reading Caste, the book by Isabel Wilkerson soon as a part of a Rush family thing that we're doing. I haven't had a chance to dive into it, but I think the premise is that there's a caste system across our country that's so ingrained that for us to see real change, we've got to be able to get at the systems that separate us and cause certain people to be on the bottom and certain people to be on the top. And so, what do you all think? Can we move away from that? Quincy, you look pensive.
I think in order to move away from that, it goes back to what we talked about before. I think I don't think we're going to be able to accomplish anything differently unless we recognize that. I mean, everybody recognizes that this is a problem, even those who don't think that there is a problem. We have to make this a top priority in our daily activities, in our daily life. That's how important it is to Black lives. And that's how important it should be. I don't think we're asking for a lot, to be honest. I don't think we're asking for a lot from our white brothers and sisters for them to make us top priority. That's just how I feel. I mean, I think we built this country as well. So I think in order to move away from, to be able to move away from that sort of system, Darlene, I think everyone has to come to grips that I agree, there is a problem and I'm going to make it a top priority, even if it doesn't impact me, because that's what tends to happen, right? Our problems don't impact a lot of people, right? And what I mean by that, other races. Even though it doesn't at that particular moment in time, doesn't mean you shouldn't be thinking about what it does to Black lives. And it will become a priority for you the moment you recognize it is a problem, and it's a problem that needs to be addressed in order for this country to heal and move forward progressively. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I think that there is this fear of losing something. Again, I think that's what the riots at the Capitol were about last week. The fear of losing something, losing your place in the caste system, really, because they say by 2040, this country is going to be a majority people of color. So there's a fear of like power. And I guess I would say to that, let that fear go. Like, everybody's trying to live, everybody wants to be successful, everybody wants to succeed. It doesn't mean that my success means that you can't succeed. Like, I think that's the mindset that we have to move away from. It's not a either or. I want to go to some of the other comments in here. Moving from protest to policy is so important. A challenge is that it's not exciting and can move at a snail's pace in our instant gratification environment. That is so true. Like, we all want things to change tomorrow. So what do you think, Terry? Like, how do we keep that persistence? And I think about the bus boycott that took over a year with people not taking the bus in the civil rights area or era. And I'm like, would that work today? I don't know if people have enough stick-to-itiveness. What do you think?
No, you're absolutely right. I think so often, again, you have to understand that the challenges and the problems that we're dealing with have been around for generations. And I've always approached things along this line. Better to be a part of something than a whole of nothing. And so while I understand where I'm trying to get to, and my mom would always tell me, Terry, you've got to have multiple ways to get home, because if one way is blocked, you also want to have another way that you can get home. And I think when you move from protest to policy, you've got to be able to have multiple ways to get there. Yes, it's going to take time, but also know that along that journey, there can be what I call low-hanging fruit opportunities. Mm-hmm. Before you even get to legislation, we could possibly set up a congressional hearing. We could get a committee at the city council, the county board, the state of Illinois, where we could bring in people and have testimony about why there needs to be legislation that moves forward on an issue. And again, I think having examples where we can show, yes, the process won't move as fast as some of those of us would like it to, but if we stay the course, you take a look at John Lewis, marching with Dr. King, young man. You take a look at those, young man. And in his 80s, he was still fighting the good fight. Yeah. Because while progress had been made, he also realized that we had still so much ahead of us that we needed to do. And so that's what I would say, it's, I'll end on this. My grandmother used to sing a gospel song, and it was called No Cross, No Crown. And the meaning of that is, unless you're willing to bear the cross of the challenges that we face and be willing to stay the course, then you can expect, as you said, Darlene, early on, to wear the crown and stand before our Maker and have him say to us, well done, my good and faithful servant.
I agree with that 100%. So I'm going to turn to my younger folks on the panel and ask this question, which I think is so good because I find myself in this situation all the time. Do you think online arguments with people of opposing views is productive or something to avoid? Leo Shay, what do you think?
I believe productive.
Okay, do tell.
Productive just because you see the point of views from someone else. And so it might be some things that they say that you like, you know what? I never thought about it like that. Like, I never thought that, if we took this approach, this will happen. But it's like also that gives you time, like, to come back saying, but I understand, like, I agree what you said with this, but it's like, okay, what if we go this way? And it's like, it gets both parties like thinking like, you know what, she might be right. And that's another like coming together, joining together, because eventually most like of those conversations lead to people saying, I never thought of it that way. You're right. And I will take that into consideration, like moving forward.
Have you had that happen where somebody with an opposing view was like, oh yeah, girl, you're right. I hear what you say. I'm going to change my view.
Yes, but I personally feel like, because I can go on and on. So I feel like people be like, you know what, I'm just going to give it to her at this point and move on.
They're just going to agree just so you'll stop talking. Okay. What about you, Jalen? Do you think it's productive to have these online arguments or, with folks with different views?
I'd like to say that it really depends, like case by case, because depending on if you're talking to a person who every single comment you make, they're correcting a grammar mistake and just not listening to your argument whatsoever, I think that's not productive whatsoever. But if it is in a conversation with a person who seems reasonable, then I think it can be productive, because I forgot who said the point, but like it can be 95% of the things that you agree with, but it's just 5% that you don't. So if you just agree on that 95%, you can both see your common ground, and that 5% is the only thing, then I think you can have a productive conversation where you learn something and another person learns something, and you can change points of view. Because I have had my own view change before, because maybe they like point to some literature that I look at, I'm like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense, and I learned something. And even if you don't come away with it having a different opinion, you still get to learn a lot about another person's point of view. So I think it's productive even if you don't change the person's mind sometimes, but other times you might just have to stop for your own health and lack of stress.
I hear that, and I really appreciate this idea of hearing people out, and it might be an opportunity to hear other points of view. I think my problem is I'm old, gristled, and mad, and so it's very difficult for me to be like, I'm just gonna listen to you, especially when it's some, what I perceive to be foolishness, like stop the steal, he really did win the election, or I don't understand why Kamala Harris is voted, like stuff like that has these kind of racial undertones. Then I'm down a rabbit hole and I'm on my computer just like telling you about yourself, and my blood pressure is up. So I need to work on me. I need to work on getting myself together. Okay, so there was another question in here, which I think was a really good one. What's your earliest memory of becoming aware of racism? Terry, I'm gonna come to you. Quincy, I'm gonna come to you next.
Well, that's easy for me because, as I said, I grew up in the South. And right. I think being chased early on, probably, my grandmother would tell me you need to be home before the sun go down. And I got caught in a number of places. And again, this is a little town called Bemis, Tennessee. And that was my first encounter. And then because I lived on a farm next door to another family, and that was a white family. We could play on our farms together. They would come over to where I lived. We would go over, we would play, you know, again, I'm 6, I'm 5, 6, so we're playing. But when we went to the park, I couldn't go and play baseball with him. So that was probably, I would say 5 and 6 for me. And then being bused to school and not understanding it when a school was a block away from our farm. So that early, I would say 5 and 6. And like you said, I've been around so long, I tend to get angry and I don't have a lot of patience. And so, you know, I'm excited about young people stepping up, taking this on. And what I like to do is just support them financially and encourage them, because I'm ready for them to take the lead and take us to the next level.
Thank you for that. What about you, Quincy?
You know, I would say, you know, I experienced this obviously at an early age, not too early, and sort of my junior high school days, back where I'm from the South, you know, from a small town. It's called Wilmot, Arkansas. But I went to high school in Hamburg, Arkansas, actually where Scottie Pippen's from. And yeah, and it's I recognized that, you know, I was an athlete and I played all sports. And I recognized that greatly, you know, just in that environment when certain individuals got to play or was put ahead of those that were obviously better. And we all knew why in this particular incident that I remember. And it caused a lot of issues. It caused a lot of problems. A lot of parents were upset. But the justification for doing it was there was only one reason why, and it was clear to everyone. And at that point, you know, that was sort of my first experience. And then that's when, at that very point, I started to question, you know, everything that I started to do going forward in terms of, you know, college applications, you know, job interviews, and those things, because again, you don't know if it's playing a part or not, you know. So I would say that was that moment that was really eye-opening to me. Before that, there was a lot of other things I look back on, and I can say, well, man, that was racist. I didn't know at the moment. I wasn't paying attention at the moment because you're just in it. But if you look back, I can say, yeah, that was. I can't see any other reason why this certain thing didn't happen other than that. Now that I'm thinking, you know, as you get wiser, you get older, and you start to pay attention a little more. So yeah.
And in our last couple minutes, Jalen and Leosha, you guys want to jump in on this question? When did you first become aware that racism exists? It's here.
I would say my freshman year of college, I was more aware. I worked at Victoria's Secret, and I was like one of the only, so it's Victoria's Secret, then it's the pink store. And so I worked in the pink store, and I was the only Black person working in the pink store. So it was like Hispanics, white, so it was different races. So, okay, fine. So every time like a Black group of individuals come in, I was always called over the walkie like, hey, Leosha, check on them, make sure they're okay, service them. And I'm like, okay, like when I first started working there, I'm like, okay, like that's fine. Like me really not thinking of it, I'm like, okay, that's fine. But it started to be a habit. So like we'll get a group of Hispanics walk in. No one serviced them or nothing, like everything normal. Then one time my mom came to visit me, my mom, sisters and brothers. And they like, hey, like they call over the walkie like, hey, it's a family coming upstairs, service them. They seem a little rowdy. And I'm like, okay, like fine. I'm at the top of the escalator and I'm like,
this is
okay.
my family.
I'm like, this is my mom. But like, I didn't say anything, but I'm like, okay. And I'm like talking to him, and my manager like, hey, Leosha, do you know them? And I'm like, yes. Like, I still really didn't say that. That was my family. They was like, okay, make sure you provide them with the best service. And what that means is basically, you know, walk around the store with them, like shop with them, making sure they don't pick up anything or nothing. So once my family actually left, they like great service on that family. And I'm like, hey, that was like my family, like, you know, that was my family. And she's like, oh, I really didn't try, you know, to make it seem like that. And I'm like, no, it's fine. But then it started to be a repeat. So it happened like often. And they started to like always check my bag every time like I leave. And they'll be like, oh, this lip gloss. I'm like, yeah, I got this for free, just like all the other employees did. And they're like, oh, we're just playing. Like, it was a very racist store. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that's
the kind of stuff that would make me want to burn down the store, but that's just me.
I'm
Jason,
like, no.
I will let you close us out on this, and then we've got to transition. I'm going to close us out for this part of our conversation, but answer, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my parents have always been sort of really socially conscious. So they always told me, like, we're going to experience racism in the world. If you do this, if this happens, do this. So I always understood that racism was a thing. I just really hadn't experienced it very much until, I guess it was at a playground, really. I forgot which park, but I was just, being a kid playing around with this other white girl. And we were playing, having a good time, as children will play with anyone, until her mother just came out, just running up, snatched her child away from me. And I'm just like, what did I do wrong? And so when I went to my mom, I was like, did I do something wrong? What did I do? And she was like, oh, well, this certain park in this area is well known for being racist, apparently. I think it's like one of the few places in Chicago that like voted for Trump in 2016 or something. I'm not really sure. But I didn't really know that at that point, but I guess that sort of opened my eyes to some of the other things that happened in my life that I hadn't really noticed, because you just think like, oh, that just happened. That's just a bad thing that happened. But then you start to see the patterns like, oh, that was because I was Black and that was racism. So.
Yeah. All right, well, we are now at the point of our run of the show where I'm supposed to do some closing thoughts, but of course I've been sharing my thoughts the whole time we've been talking. I do want to thank all of our panelists. I think it's so great to have like cross-generational conversation, multi-gender conversation, different backgrounds of work that people are doing, students. It's so great to hear different perspectives. So I want to thank you, Jalen Lockhart, Leo Shea Dobbs, of course, Terry Peterson, Quincy Stanley, and also Aisha Jaco, who had to leave us a little bit early. A couple of, just kind of lingering thoughts that I'll share in these last 3 minutes. One is, it just occurred to me, discrimination is based on a false premise of inferiority. Like it's based on this idea that some folks are better just because of the color of their skin, which is a fallacy. Like, it's not true. There are good and bad people of all races. There are smart and not so smart people of all races. There are thieves among all races. Like, there is no superiority or inferiority. And yet, as people of color, just like you were saying, Jalen, we internalize that spirit of inferiority because of systemic racism in our everyday life experiences. And so if I think of a vision for equity, it would be to get at that, to where people are looked at for their potential, not based on preconceived notions of who they are and what they can do and achieve. And then I'll share a little bit of my story about racism, as you were saying, just like looking back on things and not really being aware of it in the moment. When I was in college, I knew I wanted to go to law school, and I had this professor that I thought was, really amazing, just so smart. He was a white gentleman, and as I was putting together my applications, I asked if he would write a letter of recommendation for me. And I was like an A student in his class, political science, something like that. And he said, oh yeah, sure, I'll write something for you. What schools are you applying to? And I gave him my list, and Georgetown was on the list. It was like, oh, I doubt that you're going to be able to get in there. And I was like, at the time, it didn't like register, because I'm like, dude, you gonna write this letter or not? Don't worry about where I'm gonna send it. Are you gonna write the letter? And so he wrote the letter. I never saw what it said, but just reflecting on that, you're never gonna get in there. Well, sir, I did get in there. And I did graduate, and I did, take that degree and go on and do some great things like being here working at Rush. So I think, we all have gone through some things, and it's just, unfortunately, it comes along with life at this point. But with leadership like the folks that are on this panel, with the young folks that are being social activists like the ones that are on this panel, with a new administration coming in, I am encouraged. I'm ready to put that crown on and continue to be the new king. by working every day to try to make things better for people. And I hope that the folks that are on this panel and the people that are watching will do the same, because I really believe collective voice matters. And with that collective voice, we can change things. All right, so now we are at this 1:20 time period, and Ms. Jasmine Chandy is going to jump back on with us and have us do some video, something. I got to see what this is. I don't know what's happening.
Darlene, I'm going to have to
Thank you,
jump off.
Darlene.
All right, Terry, thank you so much for joining us. If other people have to go, that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to our panelists and to Darlene. I feel like throughout the whole program, my heart just opened, and there's just so much simmering right now. And I really appreciate you sharing your stories from childhood to now and your experiences. Thank you so much. And for our participants, I'm going to share a slide right now. And I'd like to take this opportunity to learn from our participants, to hear your voice and to hear your perspectives. So, and for those who are Rush Generations members, you may have already heard of Shaman Senior Voices, but Shaman Senior Voices is a program that's all about learning from your perspective and learning about what aging and the aging experience is like for you. And I think a key part of that is being able to share our stories and our perspectives. And I think, there's just so many phrases that came up from our panelists where many of us were like, oh yeah, like that's so well said. And even quoting the different leaders that they look up to and their phrases, being able to share our perspectives is such a great way to keep that motivation going, especially when we become weary of this, being able to remember the words of others. So we would really like if you could take the opportunity to share your story with us. If you had a reflection from some of the questions that came up today, or if you had a perspective about that, or also how racism has shaped your experience of aging, or how you look at younger generations or older generations, we really want to be able to hear from you. Usually when we would have these events in person, we would be able to have that conversation with you. But we also have the opportunity for you to record a short 60-second video telling us your perspective. And I think there's a lot of power in us being able to see your face and hear your voice. So this is the opportunity right now to do that. For those of you who may have a smartphone with you, if you just pull out your smartphone and click the camera button, and then take your phone and put it right in front of this little code here, it'll take you to our website. And on our website, you're going to be able to record your video. It's really simple. It'll guide you through the steps. And so if you're willing to do that, that would be really great. We'd love to hear from you. And for those of you who are over the phone, right now we're just showing a way to join our website. But for you over the phone, if you don't have a device and you'd like to share your perspective, I'd love to come up with a way to do that. So you're always welcome to give me a call and we can talk about that. Either you can share your perspective with me, or we can come up with a creative way to do that. Also, for those of you who wanted to record a video but would like some assistance, I'm here to help with that as well. So for those of you who are over the phone, my number is 312-942-6995. So that's 312-942-6995. So again, this is really to share your perspective. If there was a question in the panel that really spoke to you, and I'm especially thinking of the question of, your earliest memory of racism and when that came to you, or even just that you might be different. It would be really interesting to hear your perspectives on those questions. So if you'll record a video with us, please do. We look forward to hearing about it. And really, we would use your videos just to learn from your perspective, to create future programs, and to continue the conversation. So thank you all once again for joining. If you joined in halfway through, the program will be saved on our YouTube page, so you can view it later as well. But thank you so much for joining, and thank you again to our panel. And I'll leave this up for a few minutes for anyone who may want to use the code.